The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everyone. We're excited to have you here to participate in the TPA webinar, which is Acing the Skype or phone interview. My name is Readiness. I currently serve as the Dean of Students at Naropa University, and I am also part of the candidate committee, part of TPE. Today we have three wonderful presenters, and I'm going to introduce them at this time. And they're Melanie Adams, who's an assistant director with career advising and counseling and education at the Florida Atlantic University. We also have Christina Hurtado, who's a director of residential life at Fort Hays State University. And finally, we have Christina Olstad, who's assistant to the vice president for student affairs at Towson University. I'm going to introduce, let them right this time share their presentation on acing the Skype or phone interview.
Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate you all being here. And as recruiting season is starting and interview season is starting, we're sure that you're all nervous, but also excited for some new and awesome opportunities. Leary, I'm going to have you transition to the first slide because so there's our lovely pictures, like you don't see us already. And then to the next slide, please. So we're going to go with them. We're just going to give you, this is exciting and nerve-wracking for us. So as we're talking about it, acing the Skype interview or Zoom or phone interview, we're kind of doing some of those practice skills right here and right in front of all of you. But we're going to talk about our outcomes and overviews. We want to help you, one, make the paper cut, because you can't do a Zoom or a phone interview if you don't make the paper cut with your resume. We hope that you'll be provided with some tools in assisting you in that preparation for your interviews. We'll help you how to understand how to stand out in the field, because lots of resumes are seen by lots of employers. Melanie's going to talk about common taboos and things to avoid. And then we're going to also, at the end, provide you an opportunity to ask us any questions that you might have. So next slide, please. So making the paper cut. First and foremost, you cannot get an interview if you do not make the paper cut. And so as we look at some hints and tips, there's a lot of different hints and tips. And the slide after this is a link to this information that I use. But you have to remember that your resume is a marketing tool. It is not a comprehensive job history. You will need to pick and choose things that are important and that work with the field or the role that you're looking for. So sometimes you might need to update pieces of it depending on the job that you're interviewing for, especially if that job asks for more specific requirements or specific background in different areas. Leave out the fluff. I know that especially as a younger professional, it was always like, oh, I think my resume is too short. I don't have enough stuff on it. Should I add more things to it? Do not add fluff. Do not add anything that's not going to contribute to the role that you're applying for. Don't add filler just to fill. The people who are going through these resumes want to see a quick snapshot and should be able to review your resume and easily see and pick and choose the skills that you have, and they should not have to cut through the fluff. Also, they see a lot of resumes, and so you want to stand out. So the quicker that you can give some key points of numbers and different areas that you've worked in, and the easier that they can see that, the better it will be for you to stand out against your peers. Use consistent punctuation and proper format. I cannot tell you enough. Along with this, run, spell check, and proofread. As I'm going through the OPE process and looking for candidates, we all make mistakes. We're human. Do not rely on spell check, because a good example is the word abroad. If you write aboard, spell check will not catch that. So you need to look at it, and by all means have as many people look at it as possible. When you're staring at your resume and you've reviewed it and looked over it several times, sometimes you miss those things. Your eyes just skim over them. So have somebody review it for you. The GPA question, a lot of people ask, when do I include my GPA? Only include your GPA if it's 3.0 or above. That's a hard and fast rule. And then as you are looking at what to submit, most application processes will ask you exactly what, or tell you exactly what you need to submit. Typically, it's your cover letter, your resume, and 3 to 5 professional references. They will tell you, do not submit letters of recommendation or any other materials that are not asked for. As we've had some candidates go through and submit letter recommendations, I go back and say, thank you for the letter of recommendation, but now I need 3 professional references. And oftentimes the letter of recommendation, if they do ask for one, should speak specifically to the job that you're applying for. So although letter of recommendations can be useful for getting into grad school and things like that, unless your employer that you're looking to seek a job with specifically asks for that, leave a letter of recommendation out. Then the next slide is just the reference page that I use. Next slide.
All right. So, so a couple of questions that I'm going to pose, and then as a group we're going to answer. Tell us about your professional background, what you currently do, and your experience in helping staff prepare for the search process. So I asked that question. I'm going to go to Melanie first, then I'm going to go to Christina, and I'm going to round up at the end to field that question.
Sure, thank you. So a little bit about myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Melanie Adams. My background is in career development. So right now I serve as the Assistant Director of Career Counseling at Florida Atlantic University. So pretty much my job is helping people prepare for interviews, whether it's getting a position, your first position, your last position, somewhere in between. So that's pretty much what I do all day, every day, is helping with this piece of it. But another part of it is we also have graduate assistants, and we also hire for professional staff, and I serve on a lot of different search committees. So I've seen a lot of different people interview for positions from coordinator to assistant vice president. So we definitely have a lot of good tips for you today, and hopefully can help you prepare for this search process as well.
Great, thank you. Christina?
Sorry, technical difficulties. My role is, I've served in various capacities. I've always been in residential life, except for 1 year in admissions. And so my role has been to help search all the way from the RA and student level all the way through hiring for university level employees. And I think what I feel is we're mostly looking for grads right now, and our grads are in the process of searching, and for newer professionals or less seasoned professionals are searching. I think I want to give them all of the advice that I was given to help make that interview process easier. Because it's nerve-wracking. You're throwing yourself out there. You're hoping people like you, and you want to be liked, and you also want to like and have a relationship or a good rapport with the people that you're interviewing with. And so I think that hopefully I've been helped along the way, a lot along the way by others, and so my role then is to want to pass along that help.
Great, thank you. So my professional background, I have 12.5 years in housing and residence life, and the past 5 years I have been out of the Office of the Vice President for Student Affairs at Towson University. I've sat on both sides of the table. You know, I've been on both sides of the phone as an employer, scheduling the interviews, and as a candidate in that phone or Skype interview process. Things that I do to help staff prepare, I cannot stress enough. Making the paper cut is key, because if you don't make the paper cut, you will not be able to tell your compelling stories that set you apart from other candidates. So that is huge, and I highly encourage you to check out that resource from Fort Hays State that Christina Hurtado provided on the webinar screen. Now, I also, help staff get to a place where they're looking at where they are currently and where do they want to go, and through utilizing skills outlines to actually talk about what's required, what's preferred, and what they have, what they bring to the table is, another way to show value added to that position that you're applying for. Our next question here is around what types of experiences have we had in participating in a Skype or a phone interview. I'm going to lead off with this one, and then I'll go to Christina and Melanie. For the experiences, I bat about 75%, which means if I get on a phone interview, I'm batting about 75% that I'm going to get an on-campus interview through my phone interview, because I've researched the institution, I've prepped, I am ready to go. Skype interviews, I've had fewer Skype interviews. I think that's becoming more common place now, or Zoom interviews. But I did have a successful Skype interview to get my position on semester at sea. So, you know, and some things to be really mindful of about that is to dress for the interview occasion, even though it's over the phone, or even though it's on Skype or Zoom, and make sure that you're dressed head to toe, just in case you got to get up and do something in the meantime. So, all right.
So I'm like Tina, and I think Melanie, I've never had a Skype interview or a Zoom interview. I am a rambler, as you probably have already known or can see. Anybody who knows me will tell you that. And so mostly it's been phone interview, and I have a lot of energy. And so really what I've had to do with that is learn to hone that energy. And sometimes my energy is really, really flat, and sometimes my energy is really, really up. Also dependent on the amount of caffeine I've had. But it's scary. And that phone interview process, like, you just don't know, and it's hard to read the energy coming across the phone because some interviewers don't say anything. Some people respond. Sometimes you hear nodding, or not hear nodding, but hear like affirmations or don't. So it's scary, but I was most recently, so I just job searched a year and a half ago, and the job that I'm currently in started with a phone interview and then progressed to on campus. So I would say most of my experience is phone interview, and then interviewing other people through Zoom or Skype.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm on. So I've had a very similar experience where I have never actually been on the receiving end of a Skype interview. For Skype, I've only been on the interviewer's part, but I have done a lot of phone interviews. Pretty much like my co-presenters, I've had every position I've applied for, it's always started with that phone interview. And it's so important because, as they were saying, you don't know what the facial expressions are. You don't know who's on the other end. Sometimes there's going to be multiple people on the other end. So preparation is so key. Having paper in front of you, knowing that you have connection, knowing that you don't have a dog barking. That has happened to me before. We'll get into that with the common taboos that we'll talk about in a little bit. So it's really key to have that preparation. So a lot of the tips that we're going over today are to help you, because there's very rarely are you just going to get an in-person interview. There's always going to be some sort of screening interview, whether it is phone or Skype. And I'm seeing more and more in all industries, not even just education, that Skype or Zoom or some sort of video conferencing tool is key. You're definitely going to want to make sure that you do practice rounds of these, whether it's with mentors or with classmates, because that preparation is so important. Even before we started this, we had a couple of difficulties, technology difficulties, but we all came on the call early, so by 2 o'clock we were ready to go. So that happens to you for anything that when technology is involved. So you really want to make sure you are preparing for that. And I think we're going to get into that in just a little bit of kind of best practices and the best things you can do to make sure that you are ready to interview.
Great, thank you. All right. So what are some tips for researching institutions to determine if you're interested in accepting an interview if one's offered, and if not interested, how do you communicate that with employers and let them down easy? We'll go with Christina first.
So tips for researching institutions, I think most people start with the region that they're interested in. The area, whether it's they want to be close to family or friends, or they want to go out and explore. So I think kind of narrowing down maybe the region and the type of institution that you want to work for Do you want to work for public? Do you want to work for private, small school, large school? I do recommend casting the net wide, and we're going to talk about that, but I don't recommend applying just to apply for a job. If you're not interested, don't apply for a job. If you think, oh, you know, this could be, but really I wouldn't, if somebody called me and offered me an interview, I wouldn't interview. But don't apply for that position. Don't spend your time and energy on something that you know that you're not interested in, and don't spend the employer's time and energy on that. Oftentimes, people feel like at this time of year, it gets really competitive too, as far as when you're talking with your peers who are searching, because you want the best for everybody, but you also get a little bit worked up and sometimes feel competitive and the need to like tell each other, oh, I got an interview here and I got an interview here. And that's great if you're getting interviews, but please only apply for areas that you're interested in. And I say the etiquette, if you're not interested, to one, always respond. If an employer emails you, a potential employer, even if you have no interest, always respond back, because you never know when you're going to run into people from that institution. You never know when you want to search at another institution or go back to that institution, so always respond. And I always say, thank you so much for your time and considering me. At this point, I'm looking in a different direction for my job search. I wish you well on your in your search for an employee for this position or a candidate for this position. But be polite, but always respond.
And for researching, I think a lot of people know, okay, let me just Google the institution, go to the website. But I would recommend before Skype, any type of interview or interaction, do more than Google the university's website. One of the, or I'd say two of the best tools I would recommend doing is one, LinkedIn. Every university has a LinkedIn page. So you can go to that university's page. Not only can you find out the fast facts about the university, but you can find out about the culture of the university. It's completely acceptable, okay, to LinkedIn stalk people. If the person you're interviewing with or the hiring manager, if they see you're looking at their LinkedIn page, they're completely okay with that. It's not like Facebook or Instagram where it's a little bit weird if you're looking them up via social media. So use LinkedIn as a tool for you. So that way you kind of know the people that might be on the other end that you're interviewing with, or you can see the type of people that work at that institution to see if you would be a good fit there. So I really recommend using LinkedIn as a good research tool, as well as other social media. Every university has a Facebook page, an Instagram page, Snapchat even, that really gives you a sense of what the university looks like and what kind of students go there. A lot of admissions people do that to recruit students, that they have Snapchat pages or Facebook. Use that as someone who's, if you're interested in the university, you're going to see more than what's on the marketing materials on the website. You'll actually get some live demonstrations to see if that's the type of campus culture that fits you or somewhere that you would want to be. So I really recommend going on social media to take a look at those institutions, but instead of just going beyond the website. And I agree with Christina, if you're not interested, you always want to communicate with the school or the university, because otherwise, you know, you never know when you're going to see them again. It's a small kind of community we have here, that even though they may not be at that institution, doesn't mean they're not going to interview you again at another institution, or you might run into them. So definitely do that. And then to kind of add to that, I know sometimes you hear from mentors, oh, do an interview as like a practice interview, just accept it to accept it. If you're really not interested in it, try not to waste your time or that institution's time. If you want to do a practice interview, many of your career centers offer that service, that you can do that practice piece. So I would recommend going that route versus just taking an interview just to take it to practice, because you don't want to leave that bad impression.
So I actually just came from a mock interview process that they're currently running up here at the University of Vermont, and was able to participate in some of those face-to-face practice interviews. I highly recommend doing mock phone interviews as well. Oftentimes people miss that. They think, okay, I've done the mock interview, the face-to-face, I'm good. But the phone is a totally different game. So make sure that you are doing several mock phone interviews as well, with a mentor or with a trusted colleague that you work with, that can give you some feedback to really help you set your stories apart. You know, one of the biggest things for tips for researching institutions is to figure out what your non-negotiables are. Figure out what you are not willing to compromise on. I'll give you some examples. So for me, in this last job search that I did, I needed a airport with direct flights to Minneapolis, because that's where my family is. I have aging parents, and I want to be able to get home on a direct flight. So that wipes out a lot of institutions that I can't get direct flights to Minneapolis. I also wanted an urban area. I wanted to be in a diverse environment. I wanted to be in an institution that's values aligned with my own. I wanted to be closer to family, and so we moved actually closer to my wife's family. So these are all the non-negotiables that I navigated in this last search process. And so what I challenge you to do is to figure out, what are your non-negotiables? Are you passionate about private education? Are you passionate about public education? Are you interested in faith-based institutions? Are you, it's thinking about the type of student body you want to work with? How big is too big? And so really narrow down that focus. Some of you will be doing state-specific or like metro area specific searches. And so, really think about that as well coming in. What are those parameters? And then if you're not interested, always let them down gently. Thank them so much for the opportunity, and that your search is taking you in a different direction. You don't have to go into a long diatribe about it, but you need to be nice, you need to be direct, and you need to let them down with a little bit of grace as well. So that is what I would recommend. How do you leave a lasting impression on the search team in the way that you respond to your questions when you're over the phone and you can't really kind of navigate body language and see that your responses are coming off well? Like, how do you leave that lasting impression? We'll go to Christina first.
I think that listening is important. Some people will just answer without necessarily always thinking. So it's okay. And some people panic. They're like, oh, I need to take a second to think. It's okay to take that breath and think about the answers. I think also having some answers prepared, and we're going to talk about that. If you know they're going to ask about diversity, how you work in a group, have some examples already ready and on a notepad in front of you so you're not reaching for an example. And I would say be succinct. Try your best. I'm not the best at it, but try your best to be succinct while giving them the information and answering the question.
I'm going to agree that you want to have those examples, because in any interview, especially a phone interview or a Skype interview, because they can't see you, they don't really know you that well, being as kind of descriptive in your answers, telling stories as you're responding, that's going to set you apart from someone saying, hey, what are your greatest strengths? And you're like, I'm a really good communicator, I'm great at teamwork, kind of listing things. That's kind of generic, and they don't get to kind of see your excitement because you're not in person. Instead, you can say, I really love communicating. For example, I just recently gave a presentation on the placement exchange server and did a webinar, and kind of telling them a little bit more about you so they can remember who you are. People remember stories, so hopefully make sure they're true, but they remember those stories and those examples about you. That's what they're going to remember. When you kind of give those generic answers, especially over the phone, you're going to get tuned out. So you have to really take some time in that prep area to make sure that the stories and how you're talking about your experiences gets them excited, because this is almost like dating, I want to say. So pretend like this is kind of a date you're preparing for, and you're just like, okay, well, we're talking, we've been text messaging, we're talking on the phone, do we want to meet in person now? So you kind of want to give them that excitement that they want to invite you to an on-campus interview. And how do you do that? It's through your communication and what it is that you're saying. So you really want to make sure that you're kind of getting that date, getting that ready, that they're going to want to invite you on campus to learn more about you.
Yeah, so those are great examples of ways to set yourself apart, because over the phone it's more difficult to set yourself apart than in person. They don't get to see you. They don't get to see your energy. They can hear your energy, and so you've got to kind of communicate that way. But the mock interviews that we just did, there were candidates that really, the focus was nailing down those stories and giving specific examples of times when they engaged in a challenging conversation, where they challenged someone around offensive language, and how it actually brought their relationship together closer, and that individual was able to thrive in their leadership, instead of not confronting something or just giving examples of kind of canned answers. We're not looking for canned answers. That will not get you the invite to campus, or the invite to meet in person at TPE. So you want to tell the story and talk about the value added that you would bring. When you've seen challenges, a challenge that was occurring and you stepped in, when you responded to a crisis situation, how did you navigate that? What was the crisis situation? Instead of, just, when I respond to crisis, like, bring it to the here and now, give us examples, tell us stories. The best interviewers are storytellers. And so, I remember when my last job search, which was over 5 years ago, I had a phone interview that I was so excited about meeting the people on the other end of the line, even though I had an offer to come on campus, and because of the location, my search was just taking me in a different direction. But I still wanted to meet those colleagues, and I met those colleagues. So our field is so small, and we move so fast that even if that phone interview, you're not taking that position, you still want to leave a lasting impression, because people will seek you out at conference. People will seek you out and be like, oh my gosh, I finally got to meet you. So our field is so small, and we have very large networks. So that's something to just be mindful of.
I just want to say real quick, you made me think of something that does happen. Even if you don't get the position somewhere, they will find you at a conference. This happened to me 2 years ago. It was a career development conference. It was a little bit different, and someone's like, I remember your interview, and I had no idea who this person was, but they had remembered me from a particular piece of it. So you never know, even if you don't take the position. I thought that was a great point that you brought up, Tina, because you never know if you may see them in person, on the phone, or at another type of event. They're going to remember you for that. So just always be cognizant of that. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because through conversations that I was having on site at TPE a few years ago, it was with a graduate student who had conversations with one of the interviewers at the time about just how we just clicked, even though it wasn't the right time professionally for me to be at that institution because of location. We just clicked as people, and we were like, oh my gosh. And then the fact that people were talking about that, I mean, if you leave an impression, people will find you. And maybe it's not for that specific position, but down the road, we move so frequently, we're a highly mobile field, that maybe, the next time you do a job search, they're at the institution that's one of your, the highest on your list. So you never know. All right. So any additional prep recommendations to ace a Skype interview? Now they can see you. You can see them. Anything that you should keep in mind for that Zoom or Skype interview?
I would say definitely do, like we talked about the practice run, but seeing what it looks like and seeing if you can try to do it on a computer. I know this sounds like the most simplest advice, but we've interviewed a lot of people recently, and they do it on their cell phone, and the angle is really awkward. So it sounds like this is the most simple thing that you see, like weird things on their face because it's so close. So if you can try to use a computer and a webcam, sorry, I couldn't think of the word, or your laptop has the webcam versus your phone, I think that can make such a difference, because you might be nailing the stories, you might be saying the right things, but your interviewers are going to be so distracted by the Zoom, the not Zoom, that you can maybe saying all the right things, but all they're going to remember is that person who has had the phone against their face. So you want to be really, really mindful of where you're doing your interview. If I was interviewing, I'm in my office right now and I have a fun office, it's kind of distracting everything behind me, that you want to make sure that people are focused on you and what you're saying and not any of the technical pieces. So I would say the smallest piece of thing, don't use a phone. Use a laptop, use a computer, use one of those things, because phones, it's a little bit shaky. And then again, people get so distracted who are interviewing you. So that would be kind of my one small tip that I'd recommend with anything for Skype.
So one of the things, and actually Melanie just touched on it, was that be aware of your background. So like right now, my background is not going to distract you at all. It's like I'm visiting the University of Vermont. They brought me up here to do some chatting with the individuals who are job searching. So it's kind of nondescript. However, at the same time, in Melanie's background, there are certain things that tell me something about Melanie that can tell me some positive things too. You know, I see believe, I see, you know, a lot of books on the shelf. You know, I could start looking around a little bit more and get a sense into who Melanie is. The interviewers may be doing that if you are on Skype. So it's something to be mindful of. So what is in your background? Will it be distracting or will it add value? So it's just something to be mindful of. All right, so in some questions that you may be asked, typically in an interview, you will be asked around a commitment to social justice. I just did a mock interview with a candidate who was able to give specific examples about times where they've challenged injustice, responded to bias incidents, incorporated social justice and diversity into RA training, into staff development. Give us those stories. Give us specifics. For crisis management, depending on the type of position you're applying for. If you're going into residence life, they're going to ask you about this. Orientation, they're going to ask you about this, because if you have them, if you have the students overnight on a campus, crisis is going to happen. Student activities, they're going to ask you about crisis response and management, large-scale events. You know, be mindful. One of the best tools that I've used to help me craft my responses is a skills outline. And what a skills outline is it's very simple. You go with what are the required bullet points of that specific position you're applying for. What's required, what's preferred, and what do you have to bring to the table where you've done those things. So in one column, it's the required or preferred, and in the other column is what you have, what you bring. And so to think about those stories, that'll be a framework for you to start navigating your job search. And it'll change based on the types of positions you're applying for, because they're going to have different things that are required and preferred. You will be asked questions around working as a member of a team, challenges that you face, challenges you've overcome, supervision, times where you've had a challenging supervisory relationship. A lot of people ask that question, what you're looking for in a supervisor, particularly if you get to the second round interview and a supervisor's asking you, you know, what are you looking for in a supervisor? Tell us about a time when you navigated a challenging situation in the workplace. Start thinking about those stories so that you're able to bring those to that phone interview, set that impression so that they want to know more. They want to see how you will you know, fit within their staff team. Get them to want to bring you to their campus or to meet you on site at TPE so that you can make an informed decision too. Is this somewhere I want to work? Is this, you know, you can get a vibe from a phone interview too. Maybe you're not feeling that place after the phone interview. You know, I know a story of a candidate who was on a phone interview, and you know, the search team thought that they had hung up, but they hadn't hung up yet, and then said some stuff that was very inappropriate. And that was an indicator, like, I don't want to work there. So even if they offer, you know, you can let them down gently and be like, I'm not working there. Now, so that's something to be mindful of too. I always double check that I hang up. It sounds silly, but you should always double check that you actually hung the phone up after your phone interview. So I can't tell you how many stories I have of people who think they hang up, but they didn't hang up. So, all right, those are just some of the questions you'll be asked. You'll probably also be asked around program development and implementation. You'll also be asked around advising students, the difference between advising and supervising. You know, all of these questions, some variations of them you will be asked. So start thinking about that prior to, so you can set up your compelling stories. Next slide.
So as you're talking about that, some of the questions you may be asked, a lot of times every interviewer interviews a little bit differently. However, they're looking for the same types of skills. So there's actually from, if you notice on the bottom of the slide, it says NACE, National Association of Colleges and Employers. They actually have identified 8 career readiness skills, and NASPA has adapted this as well. So this is a great tool for you to use it for when you're working with students, and even it made me think of when we were putting this webinar together for you to use for your own job search. So NASPA has a book by Adam Peck, The Engagement Employability, and it really focuses in on these 8 career readiness skills. What this means for you as kind of someone who's going through the interview process and the job search process, that no matter what questions you get asked or how you get it asked, because as you know, you don't always know exactly what they're going to ask you about, but if you're using skills from these 8 areas, you're headed on the right path. So as you're starting to think of those stories or those examples you want to give, these are 8 areas I would recommend having some examples ready to use, because you can, depending on how they ask you the question, you can kind of mold this to your answer. So this helps you get prepared. There's going to be a time you're going to be asked about critical thinking, whether that's critical thinking of how would you work in a crisis situation, like we talked about crisis management. How are you going to make a decision if you're working with students who are in conflict? So you know you're probably going to be asked something with critical thinking. So you want to, in your own mind as you're preparing this, think of a time you've used that skill. Another area that you're most definitely going to be asked about is your communication. A lot of times in higher education and student affairs, we do a lot of communicating, whether it's one-on-one or in presentation style. A lot of times you're going to be asked to do a presentation. So you really want to start thinking about, how can I express my written and oral communication? This can be easily, even as in an email, setting up your phone or Skype interview. If right off the bat you're emailing with the person you're interviewing with and you have misspellings in that initial email, or you're using slang, or something's not done correctly, you're being interviewed. So make sure you're, when we're talking about written communication, to be prepared for that, because you always want to be careful. Most definitely, you're going to ask some kind of question with teamwork. What we do in student affairs and higher ed and working at universities, we're always working together in different departments, different teams. So make sure to have an example ready that is going to talk about how you've worked in a team, even if it was a class project, something in your current assistantship, but you definitely want to have that teamwork example. They may ask you about technology, so have a sense of what kind of technology do you feel that you can leverage in your job search. Are you used to using different distance learning tools that may be used, or different tools that you just may have to use in your specific area? I know we talked a little bit about leadership. Even if you haven't had a leadership position, how can you show that you've been in situations where you've had to take the lead? Professionalism and work ethic, this is huge. So you're going to, an interviewer is going to ask you so many questions, because a lot of times a lot of people feel, I can train someone to do the job. But if they don't have that work ethic, that hard work, that showing up on time, coming in early, staying late, willing to put in the extra effort, So you want to think of a time that you've done that. I was actually in a phone interview asked, tell me about a time that you did something that was not in your job description. That was during one of my very first interviews. I was like, wow, that's a great question. So it took me a little bit of time to think of that. But on the back end, if you're already thinking of how you demonstrate your work ethic, that might be helpful. When we talk about career management, what are your goals? There's most definitely going to be a time someone's going to ask you, where do you see yourself in the next few years? What kind of career path are you on? Where do you see yourself going? So make sure to have some of that kind of in the back of your mind, because you don't want to be like, oh, I want to be the director after 2 years. That's going to be a turnoff. But you don't want to say, I have no idea what I want to do. So you want to kind of find that balance. And then the last one, which is really that kind of diversity, global, intercultural fluency, and that's just having that openness and inclusiveness to all. So if you're kind of hitting these 8 areas, so if you want to screenshot this, or if you put in career readiness skills, this will come up. This is going to assist you in finding what kind of, when we're saying use examples and stories, this is to help you brainstorm a little bit. Plus, you may want to ask one of your mentors or a colleague that you work closely with, hey, can you give me some examples of times I've done these things, so you can kind of help prepare. So these are the types of examples that we would recommend being prepared for, no matter how they ask a question or what they ask, because these are the types of skills that you want to show. I guess we will all talk about this one. This is kind of our fun slide. I think this is one we were most excited for when we were preparing this. Just some things to think about as you're going through this. I know I'll do the first one because that was one that I had come up with. Knowing your Skype username. This is actually one of our grad students asked me yesterday. Actually, this was kind of funny. He's like, I haven't used Skype in a long time. How do I find my username? I was like, okay, we need to definitely make sure you know what your username is. So knowing your username and knowing that you're using a professional Skype username or email address. If this was an email you used in undergrad and it might not be the most interesting thing that you want to use, just use your name or something a little bit professional, because again, that's a small piece of them knowing about you. Tina, do you want to talk about time zones? Because I think you were the one that brought that one up. I don't think we can hear you.
Always be sure that you unpress mute. That's one of the taboos. There you go. So not realizing time zone differences. Okay, so you want to clarify what time zone you are doing for the interview, for the phone or the Skype. Oftentimes, so I'll give you an example. So I am the chair for TPE for 2018. And when we schedule our calls, we always say 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And the reason we say that is because there are people on our committee from across the country in all of the different time zones. But we want everyone to know, so we just commonly do it, 12 Eastern Standard Time. Now, when someone schedules an interview with you and they're like, yeah, 11 o'clock works for me, they're thinking 11 o'clock from their time, not from your time. So make sure that you clarify, is it what time zone you're on, because you don't want to miss the call or, be an hour late to the interview. Nobody wants that. So make sure that you have clarified that up front. I think Christina came up with this next one. I love this one. Oh, we can't hear you. We all need to turn off our mute.
So how you answer the phone. And so I'm on calls consistently through my job, my current job, but I always answer the phone even when I know it's the doctor's office calling or it's the hair salon calling. I always say, this is Christina. Just be professional, or I just always introduce myself so right away they know they have the correct person when they're calling, because there have been times where you've gotten the wrong number. If you happen to miss the phone call, so I've had a couple of people miss phone interviews for various reasons, not realizing the time difference, or sometimes an emergency comes up. Depending on the field you're at, a family emergency comes up. If you know ahead of time that you can't make that interview, let them know as soon as you know. If you miss the phone call, I would call or email them and say, this is Christina. I'm incredibly sorry that I missed the phone call. Is there a time that we can reschedule for? They might say, yes, we can reschedule at this time. Or they might say, at this point, we're not going to be rescheduling with you. And that happens too. And you can say, okay, I really appreciate your time and I wish you good luck on your search. So just if you miss the phone call them back, but always answer the phone professionally.
Mm-hmm.
Which goes into kind of the space that you have for either your phone or your Skype interview. You want to make sure that you're in a space that you're comfortable in. You want to make sure you have service if you're on your phone. So many times, if let's say you're in an apartment building or your residence hall that may not have service, make sure you're in a place that does have phone service. You also want to make sure you're in a space that is clean, and it's kind of going into some of the other one we have with the distractions during a phone or Skype, that you're not having your roommate knock on the door or your dog barking or mom or friends, whoever talking to you. So you want to make sure that your space is not cluttered, that it's a space you feel good in. And that might be different for everyone. One of my friends during grad school, she had to have everything written down for her during her phone interview. For me, that made me crazy. I was just like, no, I'm going to look at the wrong thing, read the wrong thing. So figure out what that space looks like to you, because that's going to be very personal.
Right. So I mentioned this earlier around not dressing appropriately for the occasion, whether they see you or not. So it's kind of like getting in the zone and getting ready for the interview. And that is how dressing in professional attire, whatever that means for you. And so I'm not, it's not prescriptive. And so for me, what dressing in professional attire means is I wear pantsuits. I love my pantsuits, all about the pantsuits. Another thing, watch your hand movements. I talk with my hands. That's something I have to. I'm not interviewing for a position right now, but if I was, this would not be good. Okay, so make sure that you watch your hands too. So maybe I'll have a stress ball that I'll be, using under the table or whatever. But make sure you're mindful of that as well. This is one I can't help but. Oh,
I just want to throw in with the dress. If you're on a Skype interview, make sure, because we've had students actually just be like, the first half of them was dressed for the interview, but their bottom half was in shorts or something. And then like the dog pushes something over, you have to get up for whatever reason. Very embarrassing. So you're going to go the extra effort to dress from top to bottom, because you never know what could happen. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay, so the next one, I love giving this example because this is one of my things that I did like 18 years ago, something like that. Anyway, so don't schedule anything at least 30 minutes prior to the interview. The reason why you want to do this is because if you give like a 15-minute window, in student affairs, a lot of our meetings run over, okay? And so you just want to make sure you can get to the space for the phone or the Skype interview, and that you are present and engaged and your space is ready and you're ready to go and you're not out of breath. So I'll give you an example. So I had a phone interview that I had a meeting that had run over, which happens often, but I didn't give enough window to get back to my office for the Skype interview. And I ran across campus and I was trying to catch my breath on the phone interview. And I'm sure they were like, what is going on? And needless to say, I did not get an opportunity to meet them in person. But, just be mindful of that. Also, make sure you have water. That's something simple to make sure that you are prepared. Sometimes I've had hour-long phone interviews. Usually they're 20 to 30 minutes, but sometimes they're longer, depending on the type of position you're applying for. So make sure you have something to drink so you don't get a scratchy throat or start coughing. Just be mindful of the situation and prepare.
And I think that we kind of talked about distractions already, so I'm going to hop down to not scheduling a mock phone or Skype interview, if that's okay. I think no matter what level you are at, practice never hurts. And if you're the kind of person who says, oh, I don't need practice. You probably need practice. And so it never hurts. Even as I was coming, and I had interviewed for a lot of positions, and I had been on the other side of the table. Even as I was preparing for my interview for the current position that I had my colleagues on my level and at different various levels interview me, because you need to be prepared for any question that might be asked. You need to be prepared for the energy of those people to be all over, could be very high, like I said, very low, and it never hurts. And so don't wait until the day before to practice. I would, as you're leading up to TPE, be practicing now. Schedule a couple interviews each week leading up to TPE to help you practice. Don't do them with the same person. Try different ways of doing it. Try it over the phone. Try it over Skype, like Melanie said, to see how you react, what your facial expressions are like, what your background is going to be like if you know that you're interviewing from a specific location.
All right. Okay, so now is the time where we get to answer your questions. So if you do have a question, you can put it in the question tab, and we will respond to those. I do notice that we have a few questions that came in. One of the questions is, can you tell some things that are considered fluff?
Yeah, so I would say if you know that it doesn't apply, so as you're going into, I believe, and Melanie can correct me if I'm wrong, if you're graduating from college and you're looking for a grad program, there's not a ton of stuff on your high school resume that you should have on there unless it really, really applies. A good example, and I was telling my peers this, that there was something, sometimes people just put, I worked, let's see, at the snack stand, at a baseball game, for, just like their part-time job that may not have applicable skills that wouldn't apply to it. But then another example is we had someone that we were interviewing for a hall director position full-time who worked at Waffle House, and he was a manager. And so we asked, why did you, tell us a little bit more about why you put this information about Waffle House, because it doesn't really apply to student affairs. He said, I can tell you exactly why. I managed that store. I had to work with employees. I had to problem solve. I had to make sure that all my administrative tasks were taken care of. I had to budget. So if it really doesn't apply to some kind of leadership skill, an administrative skill or anything like that, and you're just trying to bulk up your resume for the sake of making it 2 pages, it really shouldn't be on there. And so that's what I would consider fluff.
All right, so another question that just came in. Let's see here, we've got a few questions. Should you use headphones during a Skype interview? So a headset?
I would honestly recommend not to if you can. Like I said, I would just, unless it's going to help your volume be a little bit better, if you think you're going to speak clear or hear better. But I think it could be distracting to the interviewer if they're seeing you through Skype. If you're using headphones on the phone, and as long as it works and they can hear you, if they can't see you, I don't see that as a problem. But on Skype, it may be a little bit distracting. They might be like, what's on your head? Or if they see like kind of the cords coming through you, it just, again, anything that's distracting, I would avoid. But if it's not through Skype, if they can't see you, as long as they can hear you clearly and you can hear them, that's what's important.
What about
next?
Yeah, go ahead. With regards to the headphones, with people who might have a disability and might necessarily need to use the headphones, I think it is okay for the candidate or applicant to actually share why they're using that, so that there's some clarity around the use of the headphones as well.
Yeah,
I agree.
That's a great point. Next question is, what's the best advice you could give someone hoping to enter the field with MED but no graduate assistantship?
I think
they have the math, but, oh, go ahead.
I think it goes back to what Christina was saying, how just looking for something with transferable skills, like working at the Waffle House, you may not see that as something right away, like, oh, it's a restaurant experience, but that's a transferable skill that, how she mentioned, you can easily take. So whatever work experience or volunteer experience that you have, I would still talk about that, even if it's not directly related to higher ed or not an assistantship. As long as it has those transferable skills, you should be okay.
Great. Next question is, what's the preferred way of addressing interviewers, particularly in writing, for whom you don't know their pronouns? Do you use their full name? Do you use some sort of a indicator? If you know, but if you don't know someone's pronouns, what do you do? How do you address it to them?
I sometimes, and I think Melanie, you could probably answer this the best because your role, but sometimes I'll address it to the search committee if I'm not sure of the pronoun. But Melanie, you could probably answer this the best for us.
So in an email message, again, this is where doing some of that little bit of research can sometimes be helpful for you, of looking them up on LinkedIn or looking up that piece of it, because you might be able to get some clues that way. But if you don't know, I don't think if they have a name that sounds like, one gender versus another, I think it's okay once you see them and talk to them, or, asking them, when you introduce yourself, hi, my name's Melanie Adams, what do you prefer to be called? So it's always good to ask to get clarity. And is someone, if, like I said, if they know it's always been told to me, if you do something that's not on purpose or you're really sincere about it, they're not going to be offended about it. But usually you want to use Mr. If you see they have a PhD or a doctorate degree, you definitely want to use doctor. They worked really hard for that title, unless they want you not to use that. So I think just kind of using some of that, a little bit of that common sense.
So one of the things that I would say for this one is to address it to the search committee if you don't know. If there is a point person on the search committee and you do not know their preferred pronouns or their pronouns, address it to their full name. That's what I would say. And they don't have a doctorate. If they have a doctorate, that's easy, doctor, But I think misgendering is not the right foot to get on campus, and you definitely will want to share your pronouns during the interview, and often search committees will share their pronouns during the interview. I think that's happening more and more frequently, also on site. So that's something that we've seen increase over the past 5 years that I've been a part of TPE. So I think more and more campuses are starting to, with their search teams, sharing their pronouns and asking, what are your pronouns for when you introduce yourself, so that people are not being misgendered. That's a great question. Okay, other questions. Should you prepare questions for a phone Skype interview? Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
If so, how many and what are typical questions? So the phone interview, it's going to be about them asking you about 20 minutes of questions, and then them leaving a little bit of time for you to ask questions. You should have at least, I have a list of questions, and they may give you time to ask 2 to 3 questions, maybe less if you're running out of time, but always have a list of more than that. Do your research. What do you want to know about this place? What do you want to know about the student body at this institution that you were not able to find via your research? Show us that you are invested in that institution, want to know more, want to be a part of what makes that institution great. So yes, of course, if someone does not ask questions, they will not get in front of me. So you have to ask questions, and the questions should be based on your research and what you want to know.
And I would say a no for me is there are a lot of institutions that don't post their salary range. that is not a phone interview question or a Zoom interview question. I feel like that's if you get later on in the process, and some people will say, I really don't want to waste my time if I don't know. We all know that we're not in this field to be, you know, living a lavish lifestyle or to make a lot of money, but that is definitely a no-no for me, because what it really says is my focus, although I understand the need to cover your cost of living and things that you might prefer, definitely not in the first interview. I feel like that's further on in the process. You're discussing, okay, what are some of my benefits that I would be able to have through human resources? What is the salary range? Typically, the salary range is discussed, for me, it's always been discussed after I've gotten an on-campus interview.
Mm-hmm. So the next question is, I am the type of person whose face tends to get red when they are nervous or anxious. Is that something that we should just ignore during a Skype interview?
Yes, I'm someone, like you can see, I'm fair skinned, I'm red right now. It's the same as in person. You know, it's just kind of part of who you are. So I don't think that's anything wrong with that. Like I said, I know I used it as a female, or I'd be able to use some makeup and things. I don't feel comfortable with that. But I wouldn't let that hinder anything with your interview process. It's a part of who you are. So I wouldn't let that make you more nervous at all.
And I think it's on the other end of the interviewing table. I've never judged a person to say, oh, well, they get really, I know people are nervous. We're nervous as interviewers too. And so people get nervous. Sometimes they have different reactions in different ways. And that has never, ever in a situation taken a candidate out of the candidate pool for me.
All right, next question. If one of my non-negotiables is a res life position that allows me to bring my dog, when's the right time to ask that? I first want to preface this with, there is the live-in, live-on report that Rich Horowitz puts out every single year. Google that, live-in, live-on report. And for res life positions, it will give you a chart of what institutions allow what animals. Now, it will be important for you to still ask that in your process, because sometimes things change, but that's going to be one of the best resources for you, is that live-in, live-on report. So in the interview process, I would say prior to the on-campus, I would want to know prior to going on, because I don't want to waste their time, because a dog is a part of a family.
Mm-hmm. As we all have dogs, so we understand that.
True. That's true.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. So that was all the questions that were asked of us today. Thank you so much for taking the afternoon to connect with us around acing the phone or Skype interview. If you have any questions, you can find us through TPE, or so I'm the chair for TPE, or you can go ahead and email us. So my email is colstad@towson.edu.
My email address is cmhurtado@shsu.edu.
And my email is madams, so madams, 39@fau.edu.
And you can
All right,
also
thank you.
email the candidate development committee with your questions as well. We look forward to seeing you on our next TPA webinar, which is on February the 7th, and we will be talking about networking and TPE reception. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Have a good day.